Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation, a podcast about the people working to modernize a centuries-old profession. In this episode of Cracking Legal Innovation, we're joined by Amol Bargaje, Innovation Lead at Mayer Brown. Amol leads innovation in a large international law firm with offices all over the world. They've got more than 20 global offices and about 2,000 attorneys. So in today's episode, we'll explore topics including how global law firms approach large-scale technology rollouts, how to overcome the challenges of geographic and practice area diversity, how to approach different types of technology, and how to capitalize on early wins to drive momentum. I'm also joined by my co-host, Legatic CEO Anthony Seal. Amol, welcome. So I'm keen to start discussing about how you think about global rollouts within a firm like Mayer Brown. So where do you start? You know, you're bringing in some new technology, you're looking to implement it across quite a diverse organization. Where do you start thinking about a rollout?
There are a couple of that's a very fair point and a fair question. And as innovation, we are constantly looking for either new ways of doing this legal services or solving something which has not been solved by other groups or other departments or other solutions in place. So we're always looking for something unique, generally, right? Or something which is very exciting. But to your point, when we are looking for a solution, when we hone in on a solution, I assume we are assuming here that we've already taken care of, process improvement or the focus on what we are trying to solve. The key here is looking for a solution which is solving a specific problem. So what I mean to say is there should be problem clarity, and then there should be clarity on the solution you're looking for in the solution that you choose. That fit is the most important thing. Because if we try to look for a solution and then which is looking for a problem, that implementation is always a complicated one because you're almost trying to convince people to take on the solution. So if a solution is being implemented where it is resolving a specific problem or the problem fit is accurate, those are the ones which go successful, and those are the ones which I personally like. Now, there are situations which are different. We will, of course, talk about it as you move along. The other North Star, I would say, is, especially for law firms, is client demand. If the client is asking for a certain aspect or certain solution to be done, whether it is a security solution, whether it is a solution which is making life complicated for the users of the solution, that sometimes is also a good reason or a good driver. So I'm looking for a couple of things: problem clarity, strategic fit, and client alignment. I think those three things, if your solution checks one or more of these boxes, I think that's a good sign to proceed with those solution implementations.
And Amol, within a global law firm, that challenge around actually finding the problem, because the problem might be slightly different in some places versus others. How do you actually think about defining what that sort of problem statement is, and how do you almost prioritize the different voices that are shouting about, the different problems?
Good question. The answer to that one word answer is to listen. And that is a lot of what our teams do in our travels, if you will, virtual or physical travels across the firm. The key thing that our team does is to listen to what the practice is trying to say, or what the client is trying to say, is what is the root cause, or what is the problem what is the friction they're facing. And once you do that, and sometimes it's anecdotal, right? People will say, hey, I wish I could accelerate my time entry, right? Entering your time is always the task that is very laborious and painful. So you have to listen to what the customer is saying directly or indirectly. So understanding the unstated need is the key thing. And for that, you have to listen. And of course, there is a phrase people use, active listening. You have to sort of listen and ask questions so that you can listen better and understand the problem better. So that is the key in figuring out what is the problem that the customer is facing.
So if you've done that active listening and you've sort of defined what the problem statement is, and you're very clear on what that is, and you've got an idea of a solution or solutions that can solve for that, how do you actually go about building a business case for bringing that for bringing the solution in those sort of early stages?
So the couple of ways we do that. One is we would make sure that it is something that is a priority for the firm. And when I say that, what I mean is we can't solve each and every problem, right? So we have to prioritize it based on how closely it is aligned with the firm's strategic priorities, right? If it falls in a set of topics that the firm is already supporting or wanting to embrace, those are easier ones to build a business case for, right? The second is we do some quantitative. So there's two parts, right? One is the qualitative, which is the strategic alignment. The quantitative part would be looking at how much either hours or money the firm is spending on that problem, which can potentially be avoided, potentially be solved, or twisted into if it's a loss-making proposition. For example, many of tasks that our lawyers do, unfortunately, not many, but many of them don't get paid sometimes, right? So the concept of write-downs. So looking at how much a particular practice is hurting in terms of write-downs, meaning the tasks that they cannot bill or the client is not willing or at least not inclined to pay. That's an angle that we take on the quantitative side to say, hey, if we could make this cost go down, or if you could make this process more efficient. So what I'm trying to say here is gathering data, either by conducting some work motion studies or by doing process analysis or doing pilot programs. Those are some ways we create quantitative impetus for the impact that the solution could create or the problem to be addressed is. And there's qualitative, which is strategic alignment, whether it's a problem worth solving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. So let's say you've gone through that whole process. You know that it's aligned. So you've had the discussions internally. You know it's a pain point that's well defined. You know the solution that is going to solve that. It's aligned with your strategic goals, and you've got a quantitative basis to indicate that this is going to have an ROI and it's worth investing in further. What are some of the biggest early decisions that you've made that actually lead to success for a rollout? In those early phases, are there things that you've seen that have led to success?
That's a very, very deep and good question. So I'm thinking here, the most important thing, which I have made mistakes on this in the past, and I learned on this all the time, is cannot stress this anymore, but having a sponsor, a high-level sponsor, an executive sponsor, typically a partner in the firm, and hopefully an equity partner or a senior partner, goes a long way, very long way, because many projects start off because there is a good fit, right? Going back to my earlier problem or earlier statement, there's a good fit between the problem and the solution, but if there are not any takers, whether it's a client or whether it's a partner or a practice head, your mileage is going to vary because you're going to run into problems down the line. You might purchase a solution, begin an implementation, have a budget, but then when we get down to other parts of the implementation, meaning adoption, meaning change management, all those things, you run into some trouble there if you haven't started at the beginning with a good partner sponsor or a senior sponsor. If you can get somebody from the executive or managing committee, that's even better. So that's one thing, and that's one of the major things actually. And going back to problem fit, right? You have to have a problem that has legs and that has got impact, and then your solution should be something that actually solves the problem in a pretty decent way.
Oh no, I was just about to
Are you
say this is
saying
like
something?
music to my ears. Like I think like if there's some lessons we've learned, it's so aligned with this, which is like always building. On the other side, we're always like building to a problem. That the time that is best saved is the time like where you do have write-offs and things like that. And we've seen law firms try with champions, and we've seen law firms try without champions. And the enthusiasm you get, particularly from a senior level stakeholder in a law firm, is absolutely critical. And it's quite interesting because I think it might relate to law firms being fairly sort of hierarchical organizations in a way, but that person often doesn't need to do anything. The nature of our platform is a partner might, if they want to, can come in and maybe look at the status of transactions and things like that. But usually it's less about the partner actually using the technology itself. It's just about like having that senior level enthusiasm. And I find it really interesting. I wonder whether, law firms are just super hierarchical and people are always, there's such a strong incentive to do things the way that more senior people want. And if in a way, sometimes that works the other way around where you have these traditional inbuilt methods that might be kind of crazy from a process or lack of technology perspective, but because the senior person believes in that way, that's why that kind of sticks. All it takes is one really senior person to kind of change their view, and suddenly the organization like changes and falls into line, even if it's not that person doing it. So I must say I can really, really relate to a lot of what you're saying there.
Yep. It's. I would say the law firms are not very hierarchical actually, because there are so many equity partners. There are, yes, a limited number of people on the committees. Yeah, but there's not one. I mean, there is a firm managing partner. There is a chairman, but they're not necessarily driving, at the level of a project. They're not necessarily on the project level. They are at the strategic level. So from where I am sitting or where I am responding to this question, I think law firms are then less hierarchical, and that leads to complications actually, even though it sounds very democratic and all that, but it actually leads to less order, if I may, some chaos, or chaos might be a wrong word in this context, but like it leads to some grayness. Like you can't say thou shall use this tool, right? You can't mandate.
No.
And this is probably true for most law firms.
Very sensibly. Yeah, partners like having that many business owners in the business is very different to organizations. Like we've seen some corporates who just say this is the process and it just goes through the organization. Certainly where for what we've experienced, like where you're talking about the doing of a deal, you just can't tell partners how to do their deals. Like they either believe in your way of doing it or they don't. It's interesting to actually think that they're not very hierarchical organizations from that perspective as well. Yeah.
I know, Amol, when we've spoken, there've been, there maybe has been momentum in some areas, of the business. And we've talked about certain key people that would be really great to, to get on board and get on board early, because that can unlock more usage and they'll have influence. How do you think about that, and at what stage? Because there's a degree to which there's a certain momentum itself in relation to the tool coming in for a certain practice area, but to get that early momentum, you want to leverage it and you want to get certain people on board. So how do you think about getting some of those really key people engaging with a platform that you've brought in?
So I think you're making a very great point, and I will reference a book which I've read in the past. It's a book called Contagious by author is Jonah Berger, I think. And then there is another set of books. The Heath brothers, I think Chip Heath and Dan Heath, they have a book called Change, I think. But the first book, Contagious, and I will answer your question, of course, because I think getting those influencers or people who other people follow, right, on board is key. It is almost one of the tricks in the book, if you will, is you have to, but the thing is, you have to be solving a problem which the influencer is interested in. So I don't know which comes first, right? I don't think we solve a problem and then start looking for the specific influencer. You have to find the influencer within the remit that you have. So let's say I'm doing a transactional practice project, right? I can't expect an influential litigator to support me. You get, especially in the context of a global law firm, if you are a smaller law firm and you do just one type of law, like say labor and employment, right? Then you have a much controlled environment. But especially for global law firms, we have to look for regional influencers. You have to look for practice or subject matter specific influencers. And you have to be solving the problem which should make sense to them. And this goes back to the first thing. The implementations or solution rollouts which are solving a specific problem, and a problem which is felt by many or hurts a lot, is always going to get good traction automatically, right? Because you can get many heads nodding in the room if you say, hey, I'm going to make your time entry easy, or I'm going to make XYZ easy, right? So those are perennial, if I may, winners. And the second part is, how good is the solution to solve the problem? Because if it is something, and I hope we get into this, and if not, I'm going to jump into it quickly. The second thing that I look for is what is the user journey? If it is not like Apple, if it is not like, say, the Tesla car or whichever, take the example which is appropriate for the industry and the market. The user journey is the most important aspect. You could have a great solution, great problem being solved and whatnot. The firm managing partner is behind you. You have an open checkbook. But if the user journey, and what do I mean by user journey? If the solution is not integrated with, let's say, the core infrastructure or technical infrastructure, and in your context, let's say, a product which the lawyers are to be used, if it's not integrated with, say, Microsoft platform, which is mostly the platform that most law firms have, or you're not well integrated with the DMS, the document management system. I'm not saying that it will fail. I'm just saying your chances of success are much improved if the solution you're implementing is going to be well integrated with the rest of the infrastructure. If you meet the lawyers where the lawyers are, that's what I mean by user journey. If you can provide a solution which is, let's say in today's world, mobile enabled, or what is it called? Responsive app. I know I'm getting technical here, but those kind of things go a long way in improving the adoption or the implementation of your solution. Is that where you're going, Daniel, or did I miss your question?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because so much of the technology historically for law firms has not been that focused on the end user. Ultimately it's been quite clunky, it's been quite difficult to use, and the expectations have shifted, right? We're so used to in our personal lives having technology, whether it's, the phones we use or the apps and everything else that's more focused on, straight to consumer. And there is an expectation that that's what the technology that we're using in our work life is like as well. I think the challenge still, even with that, you can focus on that user journey, making it really simple to adopt and to use, but there's still that behavior change piece, and you still need to win over, convince people to do things a different way. In our case with transaction management, it is a behavior change piece. You're convincing people to do things differently than they've done it to date. And we'll have a chance to dive into the geographic and practice area specific dynamics. Something I took from what you were saying, and that's a further challenge, is the difference of personas that you're dealing with within a law firm as well. How do you win over that, the managing partner or the senior partner? What do they care about? What does the trainee or the junior attorney that's using the technology, really care about? And just an anecdote that came to mind when you were talking, because this wasn't Mayor Brown, but another firm that we worked with found it almost like a little bit strange. I was sitting in a meeting with them, with this particular very senior partner in with the client, and they were praising what our system did. They were talking all about, what it did, everything else. I knew that particular partner had never logged into the platform. The team had, and the team loved it. But for them, what they cared about was the client was happy. Ultimately, their lawyers were happier. It was reducing write-offs. It was doing all of this. They knew in principle what the software did, but they never touched it. I knew that. We had the data before going into the meeting. But ultimately, it's what do they care about? And for them, there were different things that they care about than, let's say, the junior lawyer, who it just makes their life a lot easier, or for the client, who it gave them a better experience. So I think that's one of the challenges as well. And as a global law firm, you're having to deal with the different levels of seniority persona-wise, and then you add into the mix all the complications of practice areas and geographies, and that's what makes this all so incredibly complicated.
It is. You're right. I mean, yeah, that is a true statement completely, because what I would expect, and this is some experience, and you actually brought back some memories from some implementations in the past where we were not necessarily aware of requirements. Let's say whether they are data privacy requirements sometimes, and you start off in, say, a region with different compliance requirements, if you will, and then you run into a geography, let's say somewhere in Europe, where you are required that you need to have the servers located in their jurisdiction, otherwise they can't use your system. And we're like, oh. Now, having been in the industry as well as at this particular firm for now 7+ years, I know my way around in terms of like, oh, if we are trying to roll out a solution in XYZ region, we have to be aware of this and that, right? So that there are those requirements, of course, the regulations, GDPR, CCPA, all that. So those are always there. Those are always there. Sometimes you have to worry about, especially in a global law firm context, translation, language translation. You have to look for solutions which are capable of being used in different regions based on that. Especially in our case, we have most of it is English-like, but since we have clients who are from different parts of the world, we have to be able to handle different languages. So that becomes a consideration for us, the location of the servers and all that. And each office has a different culture, regardless of being part of the larger firm. And methodology you use for change management is different. Subtle difference, but there are differences.
I wanted to ask earlier, actually, it was quite interesting. With AI, some people are feeling like AI is just such an important technology that they're almost skipping that step of saying, what's the problem here? And going straight to AI is the solution. And then this is just so obviously important that we'll make an exception for AI and we'll sort of say we'll incentivize AI use or we'll roll it out to everyone, and then they'll find the use cases. And maybe it's a bit the kind of technology set in its kind of general chatbot form that is maybe you have to get more creative with the use cases or you have to find them for yourself, and that is harder to do. Curious for your view on that.
Yeah, and Anthony, you're making an excellent point there, because a lot of us did fall into that trap, right? Because that was how it was about a year and a half ago, right? Our firm managing partner, our leaders were calling us and said, basically, hey, what are we doing on AI? Literally, that was how it was almost worded, right? And it was more the FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, we can't be left behind. We should be doing this because everybody else is doing it. And I think everybody knew that this was how it was. In a sense, it was being led with the solution first, then the problem. But all of us have come to realize, and I'm not saying we are specifically worse or ahead of anybody in that sense, but the discussion is now coming back to what is the problem that the solution, in this case, the Gen AI platforms, are actually solving. Because at some point, the buck has to stop somewhere. We're saying, what is the value this is providing? We are spending XYZ $1,000, right? We are giving it to everybody. Yes, we've crossed the timeline of like, yes, we are not like, unaware of this technology. We have at least got the muscle working at the firm. The adoption can be different, but that's the point here is people know what Gen AI is right now. People have used it in their private lives. People have thankfully used it in their work life. But like, why should we spend XYZ? How many solutions should we have? Should we have it in the research platform? Should we have it here? So there's the application sprawl, which technical folks have dealt with over the years. It has now started to happen with AI, and people are now questioning. So we ideally, if those law firms who started slowly are going to be slightly laughing, if you will, saying, we didn't go follow the lemmings like we all do. We were patient, we were deliberate, we were intentional in identifying what this could do and then jumped into it. And those of us who swam and took the plunge, I think we have the advantage that we have been acclimatized to what this technology can do. So I think it is too early to tell, but I will agree that now everybody's trying to be sensible and not just jumping into the pool. And that's important. It goes back to my original comment. I am going to keep harping on that. You have to be clear on what problem you're trying to solve. And for that problem, we should have sponsors. You should have the right alignment with your strategy. You should have people who are interested in solving the problem, and the solution has to be a good fit. So it all goes back to the same original story.
Yeah, it is really interesting that even the AI piece has come back around to let's check we're solving a problem and make sure we're solving a problem. I think I've always tried to think of it as like, for us anyways, Logetics is here to get your deal done. And we don't try and define ourselves as any kind of particular type of technology company. We're here to get the deal done. And if that includes a bit of workflow, a bit of AI, a bit of like nice UI, we'll use whatever it takes to get the job done. And law firms are here because they need to get the deal done. It's something I've always believed in. But I think the AI thing has made everyone kind of question that approach a little bit. And it's really interesting to hear that people are still coming back to that, even in the AI world, even with all the potential of that technology. I definitely think that like you don't necessarily lose something by going ahead with a piece of technology, getting people to play with it. I think even if you don't end up with a kind of financial result or a use case or something, I think you can start to get a little bit of the kind of behavior change, a little bit of people starting to think about their work differently. And that's actually, I think, is a really valuable financial investment in itself. And then if you do then have a piece of technology that works better or tackles a better use case or tackles something that's more profitable for the firm or does come with the champions you suggest, I think that investment isn't necessarily lost, because if there's one thing I've noticed about firms is that cultural piece is huge. The firms that just can't seem to crack this are ones that just usually they're going up against the culture, and that seems to be like the biggest thing that holds people back.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It has to be a change in the behavior of the people who are being impacted, because that's where the complexity comes, and that's why the change management piece is so critical and so difficult, because just like everybody else in our lives, right? Some people will take to the change quickly. This is the what's that? I'm forgetting the curve of
The
The
diffusion of
adoption.
innovation model.
diffusion of innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have the early adopters, you have the innovators, sorry, the early adopters, the majority, and then the laggards, right? And what I would say is, depending on how the solution is and the culture, as you said very well, the percentages will vary slightly, right? You might have a lot of innovators for Gen AI, let's say, because it was sexy to to embrace it, and there will be a lot of leading majority or early majority, right? So that the percentages might vary a little bit based on the culture and other things. But I think the key is, and those to me are the lagging factors, if you will, behavioral changes, adoption rate, and those how we would measure those success of those implementations is, did we achieve the adoption rates that we were expecting? So, and did we achieve that people are doing this as a matter of habit rather than as a punishment, right? One thing I would say is, I would not want to have, and thankfully law firms don't do this a lot, mandates. I think going back to your point, and I know, Dan, you're trying to say something. I'm going to wrap it up quickly to let you in. I think those the changes that come about with implementations which are natural or which are smoother, which goes back to my point of integration, user journey, right? Tech integration, user journey. Those compared to those which are forced through a mandate, let's say from the top. That's almost like in private life. If you tell your younger members of the family to do so because I said so, that only flies up to a certain age level. After that, you have to be convincing enough to their inner compass till, and in a law firm, of course, everybody is an adult, so the latter part applies. You have to appeal to their inner compass, and you have to explain to them why this is the most important thing and how this is going to make your life better.
So I didn't want to interrupt your flow, Amol, but it prompted a question in my mind around, you've got your strategic, you've brought in a tool, you've seen some good adoption. You can tell that this will be useful for another practice area or another geography. But then let's say there's momentum behind a particular product or a particular solution that does broadly what something else. I'm sure this happens all the time for you. So they're coming to you with something else. You probably want to direct them to something you've already got. But then you're coming up against the culture, and to a degree, there's momentum behind something else. How do you deal with that? Because on the one hand, you want to kind of, keep the momentum going with something that you've got, but then you've got excitement and momentum behind something else that's coming in.
That is a very, very astute question, Dan, because, and I'm going to give an answer which is probably going to be not the popular answer. And sometimes even I cannot follow my own answer, which is, you have to understand why the customer is saying whatever they are saying, because the customer is the one, the user is the one who's dealing with the pain daily. And if they're saying something, the general answer to answer your question straight on is like, yeah, we have enough applications in the firm. I'll give you a very small example. External collaboration platforms, right? Which Legatix is partially one of it, right? Let's call it that. And there are many solutions like yours and others, right? Each lawyer will come to you saying, "Hey, I like this feature from this solution." The general answer would be, "Yeah, you want to compare and contrast, and still you can't, pander to every need or every desire. You have to tell people to start using one solution, right? I mean, let's take video conferencing, right? Back when the pandemic happened, some people liked WebEx, some people like Zoom, some people like Teams, and it changed over time. Zoom was the hot thing back then because it was easy. Now Zoom is not the hot thing. People have gravitated towards Teams because people have gotten used to it, right? But you have to listen again. Going back to the point, if let's say your customer is saying to you, or your users are saying, "I like X," and the firm has implemented Y, and if you start seeing enough signals, and sometimes it happens regionally, which we have to deal with in a big, large firm. Let's say the European offices say X tool is good, The American offices are saying the Y tool is good. How do you deal with that? And there is no magic answer to that. Sometimes you end up with two solutions, which is not ideal, but you have to listen. Because if you go with, let's say, a solution X or solution Y or solution Z, whichever example it was, that tranche of people are going to not use that tool. They're just going to keep revolting, keep resisting. The easiest thing to do is within reasonable limits, of course. If people say, I want to use WhatsApp, not happening, right? Not happening, at least at some law firms or most law firms. Can't use WeChat, let's say, because of reasons, right? So you have to listen to your customers. You have to be in their shoes. I wish we could do this more in terms of observing our customers when we are trying to solve a problem. Like literally spend the time with them in their shoes for a week and see how they're dealing with that particular aspect. If you do that, and this is also a shout out to the solution providers who do this already. And I'm very glad to see that the new breed of legal tech vendors or solution providers are former lawyers. You have been in the shoes of an associate. That's why you're creating the solutions that you're providing. But some do it better than others. Just in your space, right? Your solution does it one way, the way Anthony thought maybe how the problem was. And as you have evolved, another solution might have taken a different technique to solving that problem. So that is the key, is you have to listen to the customer. You have to be in their shoes to read between the lines as well, because sometimes they will not state their problem.
Yeah, that's certainly been an interesting journey for us because like some of the original platform was formed around, the practice that I'd experienced. But that's in one geography, in one practice area, and we've had to pull in like so much expertise for other types of transactions very quickly. I'm sitting there going like, I don't really know how these guys work. I know that it's important to get it exactly right so that when you show it to a real estate lawyer, they go, that's me, that's how I work, but I can't tell you everything about that. And that's been a huge piece for us. It's interesting, like some of the things we've discussed are about like finding champions, being very sort of sensitive to the tools people want to use, really like finding problems and applying things to those problems. And with a firm the size, the scale, and with the kind of global reach of Mayer Brown, that's got to be difficult because I think what you're asking for, tell me if this is wrong, is quite a kind of tailored, labor intensive, like personal approach. Like, how do you do that when you've got lots of like different cultures in the firms, you've got lots of different offices, just so many individuals that you have to engage, and presumably some limit on the resources that you've been given? It seems like such a challenge.
That is a good point again. I'm thinking here, so the way we do that is we first start small, just like in your world, right? You don't want to scale too fast. If I make try to draw some parallel here, you want to make a complete, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to make a value proposition which is successful. Even a small practice or a small office at one place. Go through the entire journey, learn from your mistakes. Let's say you rolled it out this way, and the customer, after a few weeks, says you should have done it that way. So, a controlled rollout, a pilot, as we all call it, is the way to start. And the second part of my question would be when you start, so get your playbook refined in a small blast radius, right? That's one thing. The second thing is once you create a playbook, you engage not just your team, and I'm blessed to have a team which is very good, plus also it is globally dispersed. So you do need to be in, you can't be sitting on a camera and preaching to the customer that, hey, you have to be in the room. Yes, you have to sometimes buy food for them, right? All those tricks of the trade have to be used. You have to make sure you give a customized presentation to the practice. You can't say, here you go, transactional folks, here's a solution. No, no, no. You have to go to, like you said, real estate folks. You have to go to the corporate folks. You have to go to the M&A folks. And you have to customize your presentation or your playbook for the regional or the practice flavors that you're going to encounter. But the key is to start small, go through the whole life cycle, roll out support for a month, if you will, then expand. If you try to go fast and go broad too quickly, I have seen that you run into problems which you have to come back and correct. So rather then leverage your colleagues. So we leverage our colleagues in legal project management, for example, in the context of Legatics. We leverage our colleagues in knowledge management because, again, I have a limited team, right? Single digit number of colleagues. So You have to leverage your colleagues. And there's a saying, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go long or go further, go together. So it's almost that. It might throw you off initially saying, hey, I can't move fast, but you have to build that muscle and reputation with your colleagues. So it's not just one implementation, right? I'm here for the long haul. My team is here for the long haul. You have to build relationships with the risk team, the infosec teams, the architecture teams, the support teams, the customer support teams, which is the help desk. We have to have good vibes with them. And of course, our customers, right? You have to understand what they're trying to solve and then be there with them looking at the rollout. Is that what you were trying to get to, Anthony? Yeah.
I think so. I never said it was easy, but it sounds like you've got a really structured approach that really brings people along with you on that journey and has an impact that goes far beyond your team. So, yeah, it sounds like a really sensible approach.
Have you seen any trends geographically with, you're a global law firm. Are there particular offices that tend to take to technology faster? Do you almost proactively go to certain geographies or certain practice areas to start with to kind of prove it out and then use that to then have a Mayor Brown success story or case study to then go to others? I know some firms have found there are almost like geographical hubs or practice area hubs that are good for the early adopters.
Short answer is yes, because you saw me nodding vigorously as you were stating your point. I wouldn't be able to name, but that would be unfair. But yes, to confirm your point, yes, there are always your favorites might be the wrong word, but people you know who are more adventurous. And if you have a crazy idea, I would feel safe going to where you have proven success, right? Whether it's a geography or whether it's a practice. Sometimes there's proximity. It's easier for me to walk out in my office and bounce off an idea, and of course my colleagues do the same where they sit. As we said at the beginning, we have 20 plus offices, and I am not blessed to have 20 team members in each office, let's say, right? So you have to bounce off the idea with who you sort of work with or have had success with, or it has to be germane, right? You can't ask a litigator, would you like to take a look at a transactional platform, right? So it is like that. Yeah, you go to people who are tech forward, if you will, or who are in, plus you have to appeal to what their journey in life is. If senior associate who is trying to make partner, they are going to be more interested in being a test case or someone who pushes a new idea compared to somebody who has been a partner for the last 20 years, right? Unless it is a problem that they were interested in, unless it was their client who was interested in that idea. So you have to kind of pick and choose, and that's what keeps us busy.
Yeah, I think going back to that champions point is that the champions could be anywhere in the world, and finding them and utilizing them makes a lot of sense. I've noticed that the economics can be different in different practice areas as well. So I've seen, I don't know, maybe Polish offices compared to London offices who are under more fee pressure and they just have to find those efficiency savings on the deals. They're more likely to have fee caps on their deals. They've got to do that. Or maybe you've got a partner in Atlanta who's under pressure to keep his or her rates the same as the New York partners, and they just feel like that the bill's going to come to $200,000 and their client knows that's an acceptable sum, but what they feel they have to do for $200,000 is very different to maybe what they feel the person in New York has to do for the same amount, and they have to find ways of like leveraging things more. So I've seen some economic drivers as well. I certainly I said the champions thing I think is super important. I don't know if maybe the fee dynamics come into whether some of those people become champions because they are really looking for these types of maybe economic problems to be solved.
Short answer is absolutely yes, because even though we are part of a global law firm, right? In the sense our clientele is typically premium, look for premium clients. That's kind of where our firm is structured or focused on. But even I am lucky to work with some extremely profitable lawyers at the firm, right? And even they are very astute about making areas of their practice efficient. So efficiency, even though it's sometimes a bad word, I find every lawyer wants to be efficient because their clients want them to be efficient. Then the second type is those who want to be ahead of the curve or who want to be, let's say you're on the West Coast of America and you're dealing with the clients who are tech savvy, startups, right? You can't be going to them with a file folder, like a paper file folder. You have to be tech savvy. You have to have, so there are lawyers in our firms who are trying to be cool and ahead of the curve, right? That's one type of customer we see is who are always trying to be leading the edge, if you will. The second type is the efficiency type, who are they're being hit by because of their practice or their location, fixed fee gaps. Their clients are always pushing for efficiency. That's always there. It's not only with those who have that sort of business, which is more fixed cap or AFA driven. Even the extremely profitable lawyers I've seen require efficiency in, for example, in transactional practices, and this happens to be in your realm, closing checklist is an area which even our most profitable lawyers are trying to make efficient because their clients demand predictability of that piece. Anything we can do in that space is very useful. So it and the champions can be found either ways. You want somebody who's trying to embrace and stay ahead, or someone who's trying to be efficient.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear as well that people who have really profitable practices are still looking to improve those practices or still have a really strong sense of like the kind of tasks that clients go to them for and see the most value for. And then, I don't know, in our case anyway, things like closing where they expect it to be done well, but it's not, they're almost maybe doing well because the client's paying for that mission critical advice, and then they're not burning money on closings, and the client isn't left with a kind of feeling that they've paid X rate for work that maybe they feel they shouldn't have.
So Amol, I know we've talked quite a bit about driving momentum from those early phases. One thing I wanted to make sure to discuss, because I know you've got some interesting thoughts on this one, is how scarcity can be used as a tactic for getting adoption going. And I know when you mentioned it to me, it seemed somewhat counterintuitive. You know, if there's momentum there, why not give people more of what they want? But you've seen some success actually holding things back somewhat. Do you want to elaborate?
Sure. And I will give credit to, I mentioned the book earlier, Contagious. This strategy sort of borrowed from that book. And I can't remember what the book exactly, there are 5 strategies, I think, in the book or somewhere around that. It is akin to if you have scarce licenses, and we had accidentally happened to have limited licenses of a certain platform. The platform was the rage a couple of years ago. And we were limited, and when you do the exclusivity, if you will, instead of scarcity, maybe exclusivity might be the word I would go by. If you make it fashionable or difficult to get into, like clubs or whatever, right, into the group, people want more of it because humans, social animals, we all want to be, included, and we all want to be different and all that. So you play on that social engineering aspect of humans. And in our case, I will submit it happened so that we had limited licenses. And with that, I was giving you that example that it actually worked in our favor. We had people clamoring, and we had to go through more administration to make sure anybody not using the license had to be kicked out. Kicked out is a slightly rough word, but had to be teased out saying, hey, you aren't using this platform, you checked your usage. It adds more burden to us. We had a waiting list of people wanting to get onto the platform, which is sort of unheard of or difficult to achieve in a law firm with any platform, saying people are dying to use the platform. I'm not saying hence buy less licenses, but it was one thing. The second thing I've seen, again in the realm of exclusivity, we ran some hackathons a couple of years ago, and we had a managing partner of a particular office. She was extremely smart in making. So what she did was before the hackathon, she invited all the people who had signed up for a dinner. Right? These were partners. These were legal professionals, business professionals, all levels. And after the hackathons were done, there was of course prizes and everything, publicity, and then in subsequent months, whenever there was an opportunity, let's say a box, a stadium opened up and we had nobody going, he would say, those of you who participated in the hackathon are hereby invited on this coming Friday, blah, blah, blah. So she created that little bit of a clicky atmosphere saying, since you did this for the office and they won the prize, I'm hereby going to award you and keep awarding you. So almost like a loyalty point structure. If you can do that, I have found it's not too expensive. You already have spent the money on the box in the stadium, right? Or whatever, right? Basically just repurposing it, but people love to be recognized, right? There's monetary recognition and there's that recognition.
I love that as an example. And I think it's such a good example of role modeling. And we talked about culture earlier, but like to really drive the change culturally and show that someone as senior as the managing partner of that particular office to be saying, this is something we value and sending that message. I think, we've seen how much momentum can be driven when you do have that role modeling from senior leaders within an organization versus, there can be great momentum from the ground up. But if the senior leadership aren't bought in, quite often it can only go so far. So I love that example.
Yep. Just one, if I may, second or third or whichever this is, the gamification. I mean, lawyers are fiercely competitive, as we all know. So if you gamify leaderboards and all that stuff, it also goes a long way. Having the senior most people that are managing committee members actually be the judges for these hackathons. This is 2.5, 3 years ago. And everybody wants to present their idea in front of senior leadership. So we were able to get a lot of participation, interest, as well as a lot of rah-rah about certain events. And you can do the same with platform implementations or solution implementations.
It's really interesting playing into people's psychologies and particularly lawyers' psychologies as to what motivates them as well. That's really, really fascinating.
Right. It doesn't take away that you still have to do the basics. You have to have a tool. I'm sorry, I'm probably sounding like a broken record. You have to have a solution which solves the problem. It has to be a smooth user journey. If you give them a broken, integrated, something that doesn't work except their desktop, well, this is what we just talked about won't work unless you have a good solution, one that is appropriate to solve the problem and one which is acceptable, blah, 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 and secure. One thing we didn't talk about on this call is important functionality for all law firms is how secure the platform is, whatever it is, right? Whatever solution it is. So you have to check those basic boxes, like the Maslow's hierarchy. You have to have basics. Then we talk about all these social engineering techniques. So you can only succeed if you have the basics, which we assume everybody should have by now.
I think we could talk about this for hours, but might be an opportune time to close off for today's conversation. Just want to say how much I've thoroughly enjoyed diving into the topics today. I think the things that really resonated was just how important it is when rolling out technology at any firm, but particularly for a global firm, is really actively listening and understanding what the problem is and making sure that the solution then addresses that pain point. The both quantitative and qualitative aspects of assessing that, how much does it align with your law firm strategy, and then also making sure that there's momentum that you can capitalize on and continue to drive within the organization. The importance of champions and role modeling within a firm. I think we've touched on that in a few different parts within today's conversation. And really, I think there are a lot that people could take from this, whether it is a global law firm or even if it's probably a single law firm office. I think a lot of the principles are broadly the same. It's just the added complexity that comes with rolling out technology when you've got not just a single culture, but cultures across lots of different, firms and nuances that are involved there as well. So I've thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you very much, Amol. And yeah, we look forward to hopefully having another conversation soon.
And likewise, that was a wonderful summary, Daniel. I wouldn't have done a better job than what you did. I have enjoyed this conversation, and I hope your listeners find this useful. I enjoyed this conversation like I always do with you, both of you. So thank you for having me.